trans and gender diversity and how it basically became a mental illness and how it became the other. So when we start talking about trans and gender diversity as a mental illness, we can focus on the two manuals and classification systems that we find in the world. The one is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, and we know that it's quite American-based. And then we have the ICD, that is driven by the WHO, World Health Organization. And usually in our mental health aspects in South Africa, we tend to use the DSM for diagnostic purposes, and then quite often we use the ICD-10 codes, quite soon to be ICD-11, for then claiming with medical aids. So we're going to look at those two aspects, and then we're also going to look at the depathologizing. So what has happened with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, regarding trans and gender diversity? So today, most likely you would have already heard that in 1973, homosexuality or gay and lesbian has been depathologized. But if we look at the history of trans and gender diversity, we see that it first starts being mentioned early on as transvestitism in the DSM. And as this category changed and evolved, it started having new facets, new ways of understanding it, and new names. Up to where we now are, and that is the DSM-5. So at a stage, as it was evolving, we also see it merging with sexuality and then going again into its own space. And gender dysphoria, as you know, the DSM is regarding mental disorders, then falls under one of those categories. And it basically is about an individual's affective and cognitive discontent with their assigned gender or assigned sex at birth. And it says the following: it's a marked incongruence between one's experience and expressed gender and assigned gender or assigned sex at birth. So that is the DSM. Now we know, as they were working on the DSM-5, there was a lot of conversations and discussions if trans and gender diversity should be still classified under the DSM, but the outcome was that it is still classified as a mental disorder. Now, depathologization, and we spoke a bit earlier today about the WPATH Board of Directors and that whole SOC 7 that's now being developed into SOC 8, the standards of care. The statement was raised in 2010 by the directors. The expression of gender characteristics, including identities that are not stereotypically associated with one's assigned sex at birth, is a common and culturally diverse human phenomena that should not be judged as inherently pathological or negative. And that is why I put this little picture here at the right-hand corner at the bottom there that says, we can't find anything wrong with you, so we're going to treat you for symptom deficit disorder. And in a certain sense, that speaks very loudly and clearly to me that if this is a diversity in different cultures, why should we then make it a pathology? Now, what has been interesting, what happened in the African context, due to the colonization and the strong impetus coming from the Western side of what they believe and what should be believed and what is right and what is normal and what is heterosis normativity. Due to that, we now find that in certain countries, if a person can't state that it is a pathology, then they don't, or they are not able to access healthcare. And this gender-affirming healthcare is very important for many trans and gender diverse people. Not all, but a lot of them would like to change their bodies to fit their gender identity. We also know that gender dysphoria is lowered when a person changes their body. Other dreadful statistics that we're aware of is that nearly 50% of all trans people will at a stage be suicidal or attempt suicide. And we have seen that if a person accesses gender-affirming healthcare, the suicidality risk lowers significantly. And that puts us in a very, very difficult conundrum of, should we pathologize a person in order to access healthcare, or should we depathologize and say it's not a pathology, but part of the diversity of human nature, and then still help a person to access healthcare? And this is what happened in the ICD-11. So when they were busy with the revision of ICD-10, WHO embarked on literally going globally. They were even engaging here in Cape Town during those years with some of us about what should happen to the gender identity disorder that is still in ICD-10. So if you look, originally it was stated it's transsexualism. Again, there has been quite a lot of changes. And the GID, gender identity disorder, category was formed under the F codes. Now, F codes would be mental health issues. So the question then is, if we now are looking at this revision process, will then the name change to something like gender body divergence? Would it still go under mental and behavioral disorders, or should we maybe put it under Z codes that people can still access healthcare? For example, pregnancy, which is not a disorder, but that falls under Z codes because you still need to access healthcare, or should it fall under a new category? And there was huge discussions surrounding this. So what was the outcome then? Well, on the 18th of June 2018, we saw the new ICD-11, and it was fascinating because all trans-related categories were deleted from the ICD chapter on mental and behavioral disorders. Secondly, it was moved to a new ICD location, namely chapter 17. And then it was also then falling under conditions related to sexual health. Therefore, WHO ruled that being a trans or gender diverse person does not mean that you suffer from a mental disorder due to your gender identity. And it states the following there. So gender incongruence of adolescence and adulthood is characterized by a marked and persistent incongruence between an individual's experienced gender and their assigned sex, as manifested by at least two of the following. Now, just before we go there, I think it's very important to say that we need to focus here on it's an individual's experienced gender and the assigned sex. So it does not mean it is the other side of a so-called binary, that a person is assigned, let's say, female at birth, but the gender identity is that of male. But more that it is when the gender identity is not the same as the assigned sex. So a person could be bi-gender or genderqueer or gender diverse or third gender, and not necessarily trans-binary. And the two elements that needs to be there is a strong dislike or discomfort with the primary or secondary sex characteristics, or in an adolescent, the anticipated secondary sex characteristics due to their incongruity with the experienced gender. So, for example, for a trans masculine person, it could be the uncomfortability with their breasts or the anticipation that their breasts will develop. Secondly, a strong desire to be rid of some or all of their primary or secondary sex characteristics. So it's the discomfort and then the desire to get rid of some of it. And then thirdly, a strong desire to have the primary secondary characteristic experienced gender. Again, all of the characteristics, but it could be some. So, for example, we know that most trans men would like to only have a flat chest, so to remove their breasts, but they might not want to have bottom surgery where there is then a phallus created. Furthermore, the individual experiences treated to live, experience gender, the experience gender congruently cannot be assigned prior to puberty, and gender varying preferences alone on a basis on this diagnosis. So if a person is okay with their body as is, then most likely homicide. They also added gender incongruence in childhood, and this created quite a lot of discussion, and there was even a whole statement released in Cape Town, a Cape Town Declaration, I think that was 2011, where there was strongly a feeling that there should not be any category for childhood because there's a lot of diversity there. And a lot of children still experience diverse genders, and they would experiment with it. And a kid might say, you know, I want to be a boy, and they assign female at birth. And that doesn't mean they're going to be trans in the end. They might just be gender diverse as a child. But currently in the ICD, there is one for childhood. Again, that incongruence that they're speaking about, it is obviously pubertal, a strong desire to be a different gender, and it includes a strong dislike of their sexual anatomy. Again, the strong desire for secondary and primary characteristics of the experienced gender, and then also the make-believe of fantasy play, toys, games, or activities or playmates that are typical of the experienced gender rather than the assigned sex. They say it must be persisted for about 2 years, and the gender variant behavior and preference alone are not a basis for assigning the diagnosis. But a lot of us working in this field are very careful to assign at all this ICD diagnosis. So what is the way forward? Well, in May 2019, the new ICD-11 received final approval from the WHO, and it will be implemented from the 1st of January 2022. Now, I usually recommend to psychologists, if you want to have an amazing rate of curing mental illness, just find yourself a lot of trans and gender diverse people currently and start working with them. Now, I have fortunately over 150. So I know that on the 1st of January of 2022, all my clients will be cured from GID. So they will not have a mental illness anymore due to being trans or gender diverse. It does not mean that they might not have depression or anxiety or OCD or any of the other diagnoses that's there, but they won't have a diagnosis surrounding their gender identity. So, what is happening in South Africa? Now, our reality in South Africa is that we have 9 provinces. In 2016, we knew we had 55.91 million people. Most likely we have more people now in South Africa. If we look at government healthcare facilities specializing in trans healthcare or gender affirming healthcare, there is basically 2 trans-specific clinics. The one is based in the Western Cape at Groote Schuur, and the one is based in Tshwane, in Gauteng. If we look at gender affirming surgery, we know that we get top surgery and we get bottom surgery. Top surgery is usually for breast implants for our trans feminine people, or the removal of breasts for trans masculine people. And then we get bottom surgery, and that would usually be then something like a vaginoplasty, or for trans men where they then have a phalloplasty. Now, top surgeries, so the removal or adding of breasts, you can access through governments in Gauteng, the Free State, Western Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. If we go to bottom surgery, you can access that in the Western Cape, Free State, and Gauteng. And then we had 1 vaginoplasty in the Eastern Cape. So you can see there's a lot of provinces that don't have any access to gender affirming surgery. Now, a lot of trans people would also like to access hormones in order to change their bodies to fit their gender identity. And we can discuss it a bit later, the types of hormones and what the benefits of that could be. But to access hormones, you can currently access it through government in the Western Cape, Free State, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal. But if you live in the Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, Northwest Limpopo, and Mpumalanga, there's not access to hormonal treatment in governments. Or if there is, it's exceptionally limited and very difficult to attain. Mental health care, on the other side, you can access throughout South Africa, but we know that a lot of people aren't trained in gender affirming health care. And so if you want to know more, there's definitely going to be a lot of trainings next year again. You're welcome to join PATHSA and connect with them. That is the Professional Association for Transgender Health in South Africa. And they do a lot of trainings. But we know that most people, even through their own studies at university, won't be trained in this field. So you are one of the lucky few that do have some understanding of gender affirming healthcare. Now, private healthcare on the other side is much easier to access gender affirming healthcare. But if you do not have the finances, and although you have a medical aid, which only 18% of our population are able to have, we know that most medical aids do not support gender affirming healthcare. There are some news that GEMS might change. So that's the government's medical aid. But that is still in the pipeline. So most people will have to pay for accessing the hormones and the surgery. And if you think of hormones, I mean, it is not just the hormones that you need to access. You need to go to the doctor. You need to go for blood tests, especially in the beginning, every 3 months. And you need to buy the hormones, and it can be quite expensive after a while. Surgeries are even worse. So if you need to go for a vaginoplasty, you know you're going to pay 260,000 plus. in South Africa. And some people do go overseas, but it's not really much cheaper there either. If you go for top surgery, that is a mastectomy, or you have a chest reconstruction. Mastectomy usually is cheaper. Chest reconstruction tends to be a bit more expensive. You're again looking at from 54,000 and up, even over 100,000 for those surgeries. Now, fortunately, we have now Wits RHI that came on board, and they now have 4 clinics where people can access HRT, so hormones. They can also access for free the blood tests, the doctor's appointments, the social worker, and the psychologist. And these 4 clinics are based in Belleville in Cape Town, Hillbrow in Joburg, then in East London, as well in Port Elizabeth. So again, coming back to our map, so now we know at least in the Eastern Cape people can get hormones, as well as in the Western Cape, Free State, Gauteng, and parts of KwaZulu-Natal. So if you live in Pietermaritzburg and inland, you're able to access hormones. But if you're coastline-wise and Durban area, you're not able to access hormones for free. And then also people in Northern Cape, Northwest, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo that are unable to travel to these other clinics of Wits RHI basically are also stuck without hormones. So I've mentioned something about PATHSA or PATHSA. And this is a new organization that we started on the 7th of October this year. It's an interesting organization because we're focusing on depathologization, decolonization, with obviously de-imperialization as part of that. We also focus on transforming healthcare, in particular gender-affirming healthcare, by dismantling the power hierarchies. And when we say all of this, it is about changing healthcare in such a way that when people access it, we don't become gatekeepers for the trans person to affirm their bodies and their gender identity by changing their body. So that brings me then the models to access healthcare. And when we look at the following, we know there are the gatekeeping model that I've alluded to just now, where the healthcare provider, and unfortunately quite often it was the mental health care provider, is tasked with that dreadful task of deciding if a person is trans enough to access healthcare. So when we started off today and we did that draw a person, I hope that was the last assessment you did. Because in essence, we can't assess for a person what their gender identity is. A person knows who they are. And in the end, it is to affirm their gender identity by changing their bodies. It is not for anybody's power vested in them due to being a psychologist to determine that. So the gatekeeping model is definitely seen as unethical. We then also have the medical model. Now, the medical model tends to be very paternalistic because it is there where the doctor is the expert deciding again on the healthcare of the trans person. We also have a rights-based model. And in the rights-based model, usually driven by an activist and especially from people from the trans and gender diverse community, that model focuses on, it is my right to access A, B, or C. It is my right to access healthcare. It's my right to access hormones. It is my right, my human rights, that I can access the surgery. And we know the moment where an activist works into a healthcare space and they say, this is my right, a lot of the healthcare community would say, oh, no. You need to do this and you should be doing that. And we know that there is still a lot of transphobia also involved in the healthcare community. So that brings us, first of all, to the informed consent model, where we work with the clients and we give them the information and also have a conversation with them and make sure that they have all the information in order to give consent to then access healthcare. Because we know that the informed consent is not just about which changes I will have and which side effects there might be, but also changes that might happen in my social living space, changes that I might experience emotionally or cognitively. Now, the approach that we've developed in KZN is the participatory approach. And this approach basically works on the basis of we form all part of one team. And it's not just an MDT team, but a team that also consists of the trans and gender diverse person. We have support groups of other trans and gender diverse people that comes together and support one another. Usually there would be people that's been longer on this journey and people just starting off the journey, and they can share their experience, their lived experiences with one another. They can help one another to access, for example, when they go to the hospital, to access the gender affirming treatment or to change their gender marker, accompany one another to home affairs. Usually as part of this group is a psychologist or counselor or social worker. Other MDT members could be the doctor, the nursing staff, an endocrinologist, a surgeon, a speech therapist. Also, we now have dietitians and OTs that's coming on board. And then we have other members that forms part of our team. For example, the parents or the family, possibly the person's children or their partner, their friends, if they're still at school, their school community, church, and the community at large. Our focus is on the individual clients, so the trans person's needs and what they hope for. So we journey along with them. It's also an approach that we find very empowering because, for example, when we train people, we would train the gender affirming practitioners as well as the trans and gender diverse people all together. So everybody has access to all information. But also in the support groups, we see that trans people empower one another with knowledge and experiences and ways of doing things that worked for one another. We also have a shared goal with the trans and gender diverse person. They give us direction and we work according to a timeline that is predominantly determined by the trans person. Although there might be some areas where there are certain things we first have to do before a person can do certain things, but then that becomes in discussion and why it is what it is, and it is a consultation process as a team. So who's the experts? Well, the experts are the trans people bringing their lived experience, and then obviously medical practitioners bringing some of their knowledges, and some of the family support groups. The school would have certain experiences and different skills, and we bring all these complementary knowledges together in the best interest of our trans client. Our trans client also then becomes ambassadors and go out into the community, because quite often it is the community that needs to change and not the trans person that needs to change. Visit the transphobia and start focusing also on their own heterosis normative ideas that they live. But they're also ambassadors into healthcare and other professional spaces like the Department of Home Affairs. So myself as a psychologist does not need to run there and go and inform and train Department of Home Affairs. The trans people do that. And they also go out into the community and religious spaces. We all become trainers. So gender affirming healthcare people become trainers, but also we have trans people that forms part of our training team. And we focus a lot on gender affirming healthcare, but also we go to university departments and train there, like we're doing today. We have activists, that's part of this approach, and then also researchers. And researchers is, again, not just the professional person, but also trans and gender diverse people. So we incorporate the informed consent, we share our knowledges, we understand the changes that could have an emotional impact to social, as well as the physical impact and this possible side effects. We use a rights-based model as we go out and also advocate for human rights, and we also incorporate the medical model. So what is my role then as therapist, as psychologist? Well, my biggest role is to support my trans clients. They're kind of walking together. And I query the idea of doing an assessment. So when people say, oh, we need an assessment or we need a report before they can access surgery, I usually have conversations with my clients and we write the report together. Because in the end, they have a knowledge about their lives and the development of gender identity and their support system and what is happening in their own lives. As a professional, I also need to acknowledge that I have certain inherent powers. And I need to acknowledge this because as I have this power, number one, we can look at also including our trans person into this power and sharing this power, but also there's certain spaces that I can move into with this power where, for example, my trans and gender diverse person can't. So I can become an advocate or an activist for my client. And then most important, in all of this participatory approach is I need to be led by the trans and gender diverse person. And I need to be affirming, as you also have heard about the whole idea of affirming guidelines. So I'm going to stop here for now. And I'm going to ask Jean just to play for us one of the videos again, and then hopefully I'll be able to join you in person in the next couple of minutes.